Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about a religious event that took place in Haridwar, where the Muslim community was targeted and violent hate speeches were made against them. We also talk about the Mizoram government enrolling refugee children from Myanmar into schools across the state. But first, we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. On Wednesday, the World Health Organization said that the introduction of booster doses, that is, the third dose of the vaccine, should be firmly evidence-driven and targeted at population groups at the highest risk of serious disease and frontline healthcare workers. This statement came after its principal advisory group said that there is evidence that indicates a reduction of vaccine protection after 6 months against severe disease. In this segment, Conan Sheriff, who reports on health for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about it. So, Conan, could you talk about the significance of this statement by the WHO regarding the booster doses?
Yeah, so first we need to understand the importance of the group. The Strategic Advisory Group of experts of the WHO is a technical body which has been over the last 1.5 years to 2 years, has been not only looking at evidence on the vaccines, which we call as EUL approved WHO vaccines, as well as looking at the public health strategies in terms of who should be prioritized, who should get the boosters, all of that.
And this you're basically talking about is the Strategic Advisory Group of experts on immunization called SAGE, basically.
Exactly. So there are a few Indians also on this group. In October, they came out with an interim statement about the booster doses. However, they said that they don't have evidence as of now to make any statement in terms of the booster doses. And then they met on December 7th to look at the emerging evidence on booster doses. Because we are seeing now that several countries are administering booster doses, especially the mRNA vaccines. There have also been lab scientific studies on booster doses, not just like the heterologous vaccines, but also homologous vaccines, which will mean that, for example, if you've taken your first and second dose of a Covishield, which is a vector virus, then they have been tested that the third dose should be an mRNA vaccine to look at how the boosters react. So there have been studies, there have also been evidence from countries who have already administered boosters, and that is what now this important statement now comes out with. First, it says is that, like you've already highlighted, that no, if you have to go with boosters, then it has to be based on evidence and it has to be very targeted to two categories. First, of course, is the priority frontline workers or the healthcare workers, and second, people who are most vulnerable. When we talk about people who are most vulnerable, there are two categories within this group, which is the immunocompromised population and those above 60 and have comorbidities. So that's what it is saying.
So essentially what we saw in the initial COVID vaccination rollout.
Yeah, vaccination drive. So let me go back again to why it has made this statement, because this is based on some initial evidence or analysis that it has made. On December 7th, it made a systematic review across all the 4 vaccines that it has approved and the data that it has, which is your Moderna vaccine, your Pfizer vaccine, your AstraZeneca vaccine. What it found in this meta-regression analysis is that the vaccine effectiveness against severe disease, we're only talking about severe disease here, okay, decreases by about 8% over a period of 6 months across all the age groups, okay, which is 18 and above. In adults above 50 years, which we generally call as the vulnerable population, the vaccine effectiveness against severe disease reduced about 10%. So in this group, the vaccine effectiveness reduced 2 percentage point more than which you saw across all the groups over, again, 6 months after your second dose. And against the symptomatic disease, which could be moderate, mild, it was decreased by 32%. So the big takeaway is that there is a reduction in vaccine effectiveness after 6 months. That's the first big takeaway. The second big takeaway is that for severe disease and in the population which is most vulnerable, it was about 10%. And for symptomatic disease, which you don't really require hospitalization, it decreased by 32%. So technically what it is trying to make a point is that vaccines, like you already know, that during the trials were tested for predominantly two things. First is that it has to reduce the severity of disease, and then it has to reduce the number of days in hospitalization, which in turn means that we are trying to give protection against mortality or deaths. So that is why it is trying to say that if you are introducing booster doses, it has to be only for that population which is at the highest risk of serious disease, which is 50 and above, we are seeing in the evidence, and to the doctors, because doctors are regularly getting infected, reinfected.
Yeah, and this is the group that is also exposed a lot more to the virus. But also, what significance does this statement have in the Omicron context, because of which we are seeing a lot of breakthrough infections?
So they say that the duration of protection against Omicron may alter, and it's been again under active investigation. However, across all the specialists, the top advisory bodies, whether it's the CDC, whether it's the European Disease Control, all of them are saying that there would be a significant protection against severe disease with the vaccines. Like we're seeing large number of breakthrough infections, which means that it is not protecting mild or moderate disease, but you will have significant protection against the severe disease. That's why we are not seeing that kind of hospitalizations. At least preliminary data shows from South Africa, parts of now Scotland, and yesterday even with a new study from the UK, which is saying that you're not seeing that kind of hospitalization rate that we saw during the Delta. So that's why this is very important. Now, India has been always trying to say that WHO has not still come out with any sort of advisory on boosters. So it will be very important for now to watch out what India looks at this, the interim statement by the WHO. Because remember, we vaccinated our healthcare workers from January 16 this year. So 6 months have passed. In fact, March onwards, we also started vaccinating the priority group, which is the vulnerable group. So these numbers are not very high, because we know that most of the vaccination took off in June 12th, when you opened up, when everything became free and we had high number of doses. So that's when our vaccination began. But there is still a significant population who have, the 6 months period has already elapsed, after the second dose. So technically, which means that their vaccine effectiveness has already reduced by 10% against severe disease. But let me also highlight, the study also says that this data could be different for countries, the local, that you need data on breakthrough infections. You also need data on the local epidemiology. And of course, the most critical factor, which is vaccine availability. So India is doing good on vaccine availability. We have almost 17 crore unutilized doses. But also we need to keep in mind that 40% of our population has not got its second dose as of now. So that also remains a very critical factor. So this has to be kept in mind, that your booster dose vaccination should not, again, create vaccine inequity. So this document becomes very important. This advisory, it becomes very important, because next week our own technical body is going to sit and take a call on the booster doses. So it will be very important.
A quick warning before we continue with the episode. This next segment contains excerpts and descriptions of hate speech targeted towards the Muslim community. And next we talk about an event that took place in the city of Haridwar last week. The event was called Dharam Sansad, and it saw various controversial Hindu religious leaders deliver extreme hate speeches targeted towards the Muslim community. This included call for a genocide and a call for Hindus to buy weapons and kill those from the Muslim community. Avnish Mishra, who reports on Uttarakhand for the newspaper, joins us to talk about it now. Avnish, this event that took place in Haridwar called Dharam Sansad, who was it organized by and who all attended this event?
So basically, it was a religious gathering organized by Yati Narsinghanan, who runs a temple in Ghaziabad called Tasna Devi Temple, and several religious leaders and Mahamandaleshwar of different religious organizations. They were attending it, and a lot of students and young people who were part of these mutts and temples were also attending that event.
And do we know how many people attended it?
So when I was talking to Yati Narsinghanan, he told me that around 150 people were present there, and that included around 50 Mahamandaleshwar. It was a 3-day event, and each day it went on for around 3 to 4 hours.
Now, in this event, the Muslim community was specifically targeted. and there were actual calls made to attack Muslims within the country. Could you cite some examples of this?
When I was talking to Narsinghanan and I asked him what was the main topic or subject of this gathering, so he told me that given the increase in Muslim population and the ratio with which they are increasing, there is a huge possibility that in 2029, India will have a Muslim prime minister. And he said that if that will happen, then there will be a lot of changes in the country and there will be no Hindus left, and like around 50% Hindus will convert, 40% will be killed, and only 10% Hindus will remain, and they will be forced to stay somewhere in like America, Canada, London, or Europe, or stay in UN refugee camps in India. So the main topic of the event was to discuss this thing and prohibit India from having a Muslim prime minister in 2029, and also to discuss the increasing Muslim population and what they can do about it. And if you ask me like about the specific examples, then there were a lot of controversial things. If I give a rough example, then Juna Khala Mahamandleshwar Swami Prabodhanand Giri asked people to get ready to kill or get killed, as there is no other option. And he said that we have to start a cleaning campaign just like it happened in Myanmar.
इसीलिए आपको म्यांमार की तरह यहाँ की पुलिस को, यहाँ के नेताओं को, यहाँ की फौज को, यहाँ के हर हिंदू को अस्त्र उठा करके इस सफाई अभियान को करना पड़ेगा. इसके अलावा कोई दूसरा विकल्प नहीं है.
And here he's talking about the ethnic cleansing, the genocide that took place in Myanmar.
Exactly. And one Annapurna Ma, who is Mahamandleshwar of the Niranjani Akhala, she said that everyone should have weapon, and if they can afford a sword, then they should have a sword. If they can afford a knife, they should have a knife. And in fact, she also talked about possibility and need that even if we had like 100 Hindu soldiers who can kill 20 lakh of them, and here them is referred as Muslims, then she said we are going to be the winners.
अगर हम 100 के सैनिक बन गए और इनके 20 लाख भी मार दिया हमने, तो हम विजयी हैं, हम जेल में जाने को तैयार हैं.
So these were the kind of things. Then another speaker, he kind of threatened the people and hotels in Haridwar against celebrating Eid and Christmas, and said that if you are doing that, then you should be ready to save your hotel and your windows. And lot of calls were made to make sure that the Muslim population does not increase, and the only way they kind of found to do that was to kill Muslims.
Yeah, and another thing you mentioned in your report is that this event was also attended by the ex-Delhi BJP spokesperson Ashwini Upadhyay, and he had also briefly spoken on the stage there. But these examples that you mention are clearly that of extreme hate speech, specifically targeted towards the Muslim community. Has any action been taken against those who made it?
As I told you, this is started on 17th of December and it went on like on 18th and 19th. And only after 3 days, this ended. The videos of the event came out because it was a closed door meeting. So now I am getting some information. Right now, I cannot give a confirmation on this because I was still trying to talk to the authorities. But the local police is saying that they will be taking cognizance of this matter. But so far, no action has been taken.
And you mentioned that Yati Narsingh Anand had organized this event. And he is someone who has targeted the Muslim community in the past as well. Could you talk about the kind of controversies he's been involved in?
Yati Narsinghanand Saraswati is based in Ghaziabad, and he's a priest who has been openly communal in his public statements targeting Muslims. And in fact, he came into light and gained prominence in the media only after, earlier this week, a Muslim boy was beaten up at the Dasna Devi temple, which he runs. And the story was that that boy claimed that he entered the temple just to find water to drink. But these people said that that person was a trained killer and he was there to recce the premises, and these people specifically targeted to Muslim, these people enter our premises to hurt our religious sentiments and all of those things. So that was the time when he gained prominence, and he defended that thing. Even in fact, I want to inform you that the Dasna temple has a signboard outside the temple that Muslims are specifically not allowed inside this premises. So based on that thing, while there should have been action against him, instead of that, he was given a prestigious position in the Juna Akhala. where he is the Mahamandleshwar now. So that is his basic history. But to sum it up, we can say that he's a very controversial religious figure who has been openly communal against Muslims.
And in the end, we talk about the Myanmar refugee crisis. Earlier this year, a military coup took place in Myanmar. In the crisis that has followed, nearly 1,300 people have been killed and thousands have been arrested. The crisis has also forced a lot of people to flee the country and come to India to take refuge. This includes hundreds of people, particularly from the Chin state in Myanmar, who arrived in Mizoram. Now, shortly after this happened, the central government had written to the bordering states saying that they should identify these refugees and deport them. But Mizoram defied the centre's directive. And the state chief minister Zoranthanga even wrote to the prime minister saying that we cannot turn a blind eye to this crisis. The thing to note is that the Chin state of Myanmar and Mizoram share a cultural bond. People from both these regions share the same ethnicity. Their language is similar as well. This is one of the main reasons that the Mizoram government has chosen to help these people. And this includes enrolling refugee children into schools across the state on humanitarian grounds. Indian Express's Tora Agarwala had recently visited Mizoram and spoken to the families of these children. She now joins us to talk about the challenges they are facing right now. So, Tora, could you talk about these children who fled from Myanmar? How are they coping with their daily life, and how many of them have now enrolled in schools in Mizoram?
So, I think from March is when the refugees started coming into Mizoram. Some of them have gone back, but a chunk of them have stayed back in Mizoram. Currently, according to official records, there are about 10,000 refugees in various districts in Mizoram, not just the border districts like Champai, but also even in the capital, Aizawl. Some of them are living with relatives, some of them are staying in rented accommodations. So months have passed, and as best they can, they're trying to rebuild their lives in exile. And the poorer lot, they do odd jobs. But one thing the Mizoram government has done, which has been appreciated across the board, is that they've opened government schools to the refugee kids. So any refugee child from Myanmar can enroll in a government school in Mizoram. And I think up till class 12, they can enroll in schools in Mizoram. Right now, there are about 2,000 refugee kids in these schools across Mizoram. And as I said earlier, that they're away from home, they're trying to rebuild their lives. So school has become like a ray of hope for all of them. And it's like a semblance of normalcy in their lives, which have suddenly been uprooted. Even not just for kids. I mean, while the kids are also happy to go to school, even the parents feel happy that their kids are being able to go to school.
So tell us about what specific challenges they are facing in school. Like, is language a problem for them?
So while they're all very happy to be in school, transition for them is an everyday trial. Most of them belong to the Chin state and they understand Mizo, but they can't fluently speak it or write it. And that is why language has become a big hurdle in the classroom for them. The school I went to, which is in the border district of Champai, the principal was telling me that most of them are smart. But then they have difficulties in class because they struggle to follow lessons and they're not able to take notes. And in Mizoram, in school, they either speak in Mizo or in English. But even in English, these kids are weak. So for them, it's been a bit of a problem to sort of adjust to the language. However, what most schools have done is they've introduced remedial language lessons in Mizo and English. Like these are extra lessons they give to the kids after school. And this is what has helped the kids now. So after 2-3 months, they're being able to speak Mizo better than they did. And this has helped them in class. And even like other NGOs and all, they've also started holding daily Mizo English tuitions for the kids so that they get used to speaking and understanding Mizo. So yeah, while everyone will admit language is a big problem, but they're trying to work around it. Apart from this, there are also other logistical challenges. So several children have to be accommodated in classes lower than they were in Myanmar. So if someone was in class 10 in Myanmar, in Mizoram, sometimes they accommodated in class 9 or class 8. This is because they came middle of the year and registration for class 10 was already over. So these kind of challenges are there, and they've worked around it and accommodated them in different classes. So apart from language, this is another small logistical challenge which the kids face as well.
And what kind of challenges are they likely to face going forward, at least as far as school and education is concerned?
So while the Mizoram government opened these schools out of the refugees, citing the Right to Education Act, and they also said that they were doing it on humanitarian grounds, they've also been very clear that this is a temporary measure and that they are helping the refugee children while they are on Indian soil. So this means that it's unlikely that going ahead, the refugee students would be able to sit for their class 10 or class 12 exams under the Mizoram Board of School Education. This is because for that, you'll need proof of an Indian identity for it to register for the exams. And these kids don't have that. So that might be an issue. So even if you speak to the education department officials, they say, yeah, I mean, while they are here, we are happy to help them. We are happy to arrange remedial classes for them because we believe that every child deserves an education. And the ethnic bond is also another reason that they are more than willing to help these people who are in trouble. But it's unlikely that they can sit for board exams and things like that. So it is like a stopgap measure to provide them a sense of security and normalcy while they are in India.
And we've been talking about the children and their school life, but what about their parents? What has this time been like for them?
So if you meet most refugees, they will say the Mizoram government has been so kind to us. The government is helping them. The NGOs, Young Mizo Association, which is a very powerful civil society organization in Mizoram, probably the most powerful over there, they are helping them. They're providing them food, blankets, things like that. The church has also stepped in. School is open for kids. So they are doing what they can. But at the end of the day, this is not home for them, right? They have left everything and just come across the border carrying just like bundles of clothes and just the bare essentials, leaving half their families behind. So, I mean, of course, adjustment is a big problem, especially for the ones who are poorer. So they're living in refugee camps. So old schools and old buildings have been converted into refugee camps where they are staying. And these are all given by the church or the Young Mizo Association, the NGOs. But life is still hard because they're sleeping on floors, there are mosquitoes, it's cold. It's not home, basically, at the end of the day. Just to earn money, they are doing daily, like odd jobs, like daily wage or working in a plantation or fixing roads and things like that, just to get by. So they are happy for the opportunities they're getting, but it's still a very hard life because they necessarily didn't have to do that back home, right? So, yeah, for many people, it's still tough and they're just trying to build their lives in exile. And that way, when everything is up in the air and a big mess, school has provided sense of normalcy, not just for children who were earlier just like aimlessly roaming around, but now they can go to school. But for parents also, the one parent I met said that I miss home and everything is difficult here, but I can sleep peacefully at night because I know that my child is going to school.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.